Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and today I'm joined once again by Scott Coyne.
Hello, everyone.
And I'm also joined this time by Filip van der Elst. Filip, how are you doing? Thank you very much for joining us on the show this afternoon.
Thanks for the invite. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks very much for asking. I hope you're doing well as well. And, I'm delighted to have you on. And of course, you're saying thanks for the invite, but our listeners who are long-time listeners of this show will know by Scott's presence that we're not going to be talking about something particularly pleasant today. And in fact, we're going to be talking about something that's been particularly confusing, particularly outrageous, and particularly frustrating for a number of supporters within Belgian football. We're going to be talking about RWDM / Daring Brussels, as the club is now known, and the plethora of issues surrounding the club and the one individual in particular, John Textor, has put onto the supporters. This is going to be quite an interesting episode. There's a huge amount that we can unpack from this. A lot of it is going to feel like untying a really big knot, and I think our listeners will know what we mean when we start getting into that. But there's a number of issues at play here that we really need to dive into and that are quite important. But before we do so, Scott, I know you've been on the show a few times now, but if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so this is my third visit to the rather brilliant Football Heritage podcast. Anyone who's heard me here before, talking in the past about Oostende or Denza, will know that I'm part of the team behind the Belgian Football Podcast, which is the number one English language podcast covering all of Belgian football. And obviously this episode is also going to have a Belgian flavour, otherwise I'm on the wrong show. So I also do some Belgian football consultancy on a freelance basis as well, so sometimes you might hear me cropping up on the radio, on the BBC in the UK, possibly Sky Sports occasionally as well. I also write on Belgian football online as well, so if you're interested in Belgian football at all and English is your main language, then you may well come across me at some point.
The Belgian Football Podcast is an excellent outlet as well. The team are absolutely phenomenal. They've got a wealth of experience, and the work that they do out with the podcast as well really kind of reinforces everything that they put out there on the show. So please do go and check them out and support the amazing work that they're doing. Filip, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about you and your experience within football?
Yeah, first and foremost, I have a history as a journalist in Belgium, in Brussels, but I'm more here in the capacity of a supporter of RWDM for about 30 years now, since I was a little boy. I also did some writing in an official book about the club's history, and as a journalist also wrote some articles about them. I kind of get asked a number of times as sort of a watcher or analyst for the club, because I'm more or less up to date on everything that happens within the club. But I think that it would be wrong to name me a journalist that watches RWDM, because I'm more of a supporter than a journalist. I don't think those two are combined very easily. But I can watch it from a distance as well, with a bit of an objective perspective. But I'm here as a fan first and foremost, I think.
Yeah, that's right. I think it would be fair to say that you live and bleed the club.
Yeah, something like that. I'm kind of a rational person, but the emotional connection that one has to a football club, I cannot explain that, and that's the same for me. I can watch my club objectively, but I'm still, even when they play every time, I want to know what's happening, and a lump that you're stuck with. I think Nick Hornby calls it in a Fever Pitch, the book. It's something. Yeah, you don't want the connection, but you do have it anyway.
That's exactly right. And with this club, there's a number of iterations, there's a number of entities, and there's a number of identities that we can really speak about when we jump into this. And I think that'll become apparent quite soon. So at the moment, the club are called Daring Brussels. Now, that name was thrust onto them by the ownership of John Textor. And a number of the supporters, in fact, almost all of the supporters, are pretty outraged at this. But that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of the kind of history and context that we need to talk about for RWDM, because we also have a number of other names. Strombeek, if we go back far enough, RWD Molenbeek, Daring White, and then we have the issue of the matricule numbers as well. So, Scott, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I'll keep this simple for anybody. I think the first thing you really need to know is that Belgian football generally has quite a complex relationship with club histories, bankruptcies, mergers, clubs reforming, very, very common, much more common than in a lot of European countries. So culturally, that's kind of your starting point. In terms of RWDM / daring, if you take the original club that has matricule number 2, they go all the way back to 1895. This is a very, very old club, the second oldest club if you take the original club in Belgian football history, hence matricule number 2. Obviously, Antwerp are famously the oldest club. They have number 1. But yeah, the original iteration of RWDM going way back to the very beginning dates to 1895. Now, at that point in 1895, the club are known as Daring Club de Bruxelles. Which is very similar to the rebrand name, of course. But this story, as far as RWDM is concerned, really starts probably in 1973. So in 1973, the club at that point are currently known as Daring Club de Molenbeek. Molenbeek, of course, being a municipality in Brussels, the suburb of Brussels where the club are based. In 1973, they merged with another side called Racing White and become RWDM, Racing White Daring Molenbeek, the club in many ways that we would know today. Now, this club does actually quite well, wins a championship, has its heyday in the 70s, and again, through financial mismanagement, obviously disbands and reforms quite recently, 2015, re-emerges as RWDM again. That's the basis of what you need to know. If we go back to the beginning of last month, which is where this story really starts, the beginning of June of 2025, RWDM's management issue a communication to the fan base and the wider world to say that as of the 1st of July, they will be known legally as Daring Brussels, a rebrand. From their perspective, this is simply going back to a slight reworking of the original name and reacquiring the original matriculation number of number 2, which John Textor, who owns the club, paid €60,000 to purchase that original matriculation number. So from his perspective, this isn't a big deal, which is interesting. We're going to get into the guts of why that, of course, is not the case at all. There's a couple of major issues here. One is how the rebrand's been handled, because there was absolutely no fan consultation or community consultation at all about this. This was a communication that came out literally at 24 hours notice. It's a textbook example on how not to do this. And the other aspect about it, which I think is really important, and I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about, is the fact that John Textor was quite keen, and this is one of the reasons why the rebrand came about, was quite keen to drop the Molenbeek name from the club name and to distance himself from Molenbeek, because in his eyes, it was strategically and commercially and in business terms not attractive. Now, this is an American owner. His argument is most people don't know where Molenbeek is, but they do know where Brussels is. You know, extraordinarily kind of short-sighted. There's quite a lot of American people who couldn't tell you where Brussels is either. It's probably worth thinking it. You know, I'm not sure you're at an advantage if you concentrate on Brussels. But yeah, there's the two aspects that are really important here. There is the business side of it, and there is the lack of consultation around it. The fans became very, very organised around this kind of quite quickly, and I'm sure to get into this with Filip, the campaign, the resistance, as I've been calling it, started almost overnight, as you expect. And we're at a point now, very interestingly, where within the last few days, the club's management have been in touch with the Belgian FA to ask for permission to change the name back to RWDM. Now, we don't know whether they're going to do this. The club have remained silent, but they have asked for permission to do that. They're also without a T1, a head coach at the moment as well. So there's a lot of operational chaos inside the club. So everybody's sitting, waiting to find out which way all of these things are going to go. One other little bit of context that's quite important for everybody to know is the RWDM, which I'm going to call them for the moment, are owned, of course, by John Textor. John Textor owns a multi-club network called Eagle Football Group. Eagle own a number of clubs, RWDM being one. Lyon in France, who've had their own problems within the last few days. They've been relegated. That's been coming for about 1 million years. Botafogo in Brazil, and up until about 10 days ago, he also owned a 43% stake in Crystal Palace, which he's just sold. A bit of drama around that as well, because he's also looking to reinvest in a new English club. Any English football fans, beware John Textor and the Eagle Football Group, because they are looking to acquire a new club in England, and there are very strong whispers at the moment that he's looking very closely at Sheffield Wednesday, who do have a very interesting history and culture about them as well. So he's looking for another club in England that have potential for promotion, have a big fan base, and have a real history and culture that obviously you can capitalise on in a business sense. So that's one for English fans to keep an eye on. But that's basically what you need to know at the moment.
Interesting. I mean, it would be a shame for Sheffield Wednesday fans with everything that they're going through with their current ownership situation as well. But as we've spoken about a number of times on this podcast, this isn't anything new, and more often than not, these kind of rogue owner types will swoop in when a club is in a really, really vulnerable state. It's, kind of how they operate. But to go back to RWDM, so I suppose if you're an outsider looking in, you might look at a club going back to their roots, or what you perceive as going back to their historic roots, as being necessarily a good thing. But in this case, it's really not, because, as you said, there was no fan consultation. And I suppose from a heritage perspective, you would probably look at it as, okay, well, the club's going back to what is perceived as its original identity, but why aren't the fans happy with that? And I would assume it's because the majority of the fans identify with the RWDM name or the Molenbeek name as opposed to the Daring Brussels name.
Yeah, I think you guys summarized it quite good. First of all, concerning the lack of consultation, that's completely correct. I was invited by the club with a number of other supporters to tell us the news, and nobody had any idea what was coming. We were just told there was a big announcement being made, and I wanted to tell us in person because it was very important, and we had no idea what it was going to be. We thought a new coach, or perhaps a new owner, but then they just dropped a name bomb on us without any time telling us what was going to happen. And I think that already made a lot of people very furious. So that's one thing. And then why doesn't the name Daring, why don't they accept it? Because nobody buys it as being genuine. Nobody thinks they're doing it because of the history that surrounds the name Daring. It's just because he doesn't want Molenbeek anymore. And Daring is then for him a bit of a compromise to suit the fans, I think. And no one accepts that.
That seems like a really good way of putting it, actually. I think from how short the announcement was, how quickly it was put out there, but it was very clear the amount of work that had gone into it. It seemed like a move more towards a brand than a football club.
Yeah, and it's buying a history. It's now overnight we have 5 championship titles, because now we have the number of Daring back in the club, and now you can say now we're 5 times champion overnight. But no one accepts that because it doesn't feel genuine, and also no one has the attachment to Daring Brussels that people have to RWDM. Daring ceased to exist in 1973. Hardly anyone was alive back then. So all the fans now, they grew up with RWDM, with Molenbeek, and not with Daring. So that's a big difference.
Exactly, and I think that's a fair point. No one identifies with Daring Brussels. No one identifies with the Daring Brussels name. And at the very least, regardless of how you view the thread of continuity from RWDM back to matricule number 2, arguably because of how fans identify with RWDM, that thread of continuity doesn't exist anymore. Daring Brussels as an identifiable club with modern day fans doesn't exist anymore. So really, it's a way to try and force through a brand move to something that the owner perceives as being a lot more appealing and a lot more attractive to maybe outside investors or other people from other nations. But what he's ended up doing is actually sacrificing the heritage of the club and the identity of the fans and what little fan support he had left for him.
But, also from a more rational point of view, if you could really have an argument to say that there are a lot of people that will come to the stadium now that you will call it Brussels and not Molenbeek anymore, then from a certain point of view, I could respect that. I could say, okay, you kind of offend the people who support RWDM, but there are a number of thousand people who will now come to the stadium. And that's not what's going to happen, because there is not a big group of people in Brussels that are interested in football that are not going right now. Perhaps there was 10 years ago, but right now all of these people are going to Union Saint-Gilloise, I think, and not. And there's not like a big pool of people that are left that you will attract with this move. So there was the emotional aspect that really offends me as an RWDM fan, but there's also a rational argument that for me it doesn't make sense, this decision to do this, especially because it's not the first time that this has been tried in our history. Very small history recap: in 2002, the club was already renamed once after we went bankrupt, and we then went bankrupt in 2002. And then a local businessman tried to create something new, and he called it FC Brussels. And they played in the same stadium, and they had some of the fan base of RWDM. It was very conflictual as well at that time. Some people went to the stadium, others didn't, because it wasn't RWDM anymore. And he had a success for a small couple of years, not too long, and then that went bankrupt as well. And he never managed to attract new people with that name, with the name Brussels. So right now, it feels like 20 years later, they're kind of making the same mistake over and over again. And it's always the fan base that suffers because of these decisions that are not rational, but they're being made by people who think that they find something very new that's going to work. But there is no rational argument to think that is going to work. And for us as RWDM fans, it feels like a never-ending circle of misery and despair. The same things that keep happening again: going bankrupt, chasing our name, new owners. It goes well for a while, and after that, it always goes to shit again. So it's really depressing. From a historical point of view as well, because it's the same mistake that keeps being made over and over.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that last point you made, because that's quite interesting and important to our story as well. But one thing that kind of came to mind there, it's like taking Partick Thistle, who are based in Partick and Glasgow, and changing their name to Glasgow Thistle, right?
Yeah, or it is Crystal Palace naming them London, or Botafogo naming them Rio de Janeiro. But that's something that John Textor is not going to do in Rio de Janeiro or London. Yeah, in London he's not a majority owner, so he can't do it. But that's also our problem. We are as a very loyal fan base, a very stubborn and a very passionate fan base, but it's not the biggest fan base. We had a protest last week in the town. There were about 1,500 people there, which is good for us, but it's a very small number for someone like John Textor. But if he tries to do this in Rio de Janeiro, he probably will not make it out of the country alive. And that's a bit different, that you're just too small to have an impact as a fan base. But that doesn't mean that we're not passionate, or we don't care. We don't bring the big numbers, but I think we do matter.
Yeah, well, that's it, and that's what it means to be part of a fan base like yourselves, because you remove the neighbourhood where the club is based and you change it to the city name. It's erosion of identity and heritage. And historically that wasn't something that worked. If every single football club that was ever founded in one city called themselves after the city, then no one would go to support them. It's all based on neighbourhoods, it's all based on place and where these clubs are supposed to form. I mean, Scott, you'll remember when Meadowbank Thistle were moved to Livingston and had their name changed, and now Meadowbank Stadium has Edinburgh City playing in them and Meadowbank Thistle don't exist. I mean, that at the time was something that was viewed as completely outrageous, but now, with the passage of time, Livingston are their own club. Livingston have taken on their own identity, and I think that's what kind of comes back to the point that Filip made just there, that obviously in 2002, you changed your name again, but as you said, you've been in this kind of depressing cycle, which has been really shit, of constant bankruptcies, constant name changes. And I just wanted to know, after all of that had happened and up until Daring Brussels, did you feel that things were beginning to settle and that the club was starting to develop an identity within itself of being RWDM?
Well, it's always been chaos over here. The last couple of years, it definitely wasn't beginning to settle. But a big turning point in our club's history is 10 years ago, in 2015. Then everything was really finished in Molenbeek. There was no club anymore. The last club went bankrupt, and everybody had the feeling of, okay, this is it. We're done. The club was gone. There was nothing left. And there was another club that occupied our stadium in front of a couple of dozen of spectators. So it really disgraced to the stadium and to the club. But then a few hundred people of supporters, they would not let it go. And we really rebuilt the club from scratch. We started again in the lower league, and it was not easy because the other club and the city council didn't want us to let us use the stadium. So there was a whole, really a fight to restart the club, to get the stadium back. And we managed to do that. We started again in the lower leagues and climbed back up over the course of the following 10 years to the professional divisions again. And that showed that we can stand up, we can overcome the odds sometimes. But then in 2022, everything changed when John Textor took over. And the very stable course that we went through over the last years, it really changed us for a more dramatic and more chaotic gestion of the club after that, especially because, there was really one guy who started the club and was the president for 7-8 years. And he had to sell the club because a professional club in Belgium is just too expensive if you do not have the enormous financial backing of an international group. That's why a lot of Belgian clubs are in the hands of foreign owners, because Belgian football is just way too expensive to be profitable or even to break even, especially for a small club. He had to sell. John Textor was the one who bought it. And as a fan, you're always a bit of you have to see how it goes. And right now, 3 years later, we can see that it doesn't really go well. We had 1 year in the top division last year, which was disastrous. Also because of John Textor, who made virtually no good decision at all. Then last year was in the second division was better, not because of John Textor, but because he let the people in Brussels do their thing and he didn't meddle too much. We almost got promoted. We lost promotion on the last day of the championship. That was one of the biggest disappointments for me as a supporter. But then 1 month later, now that's being a footnote in our history when you see what's happening now. So it wasn't really the case of settling down after John Textor's takeover. It hasn't been calm for a week in Molenbeek. There has been a lot of impulsive decisions by him, and I think it's part of his character that he's not controlling his clubs from a rational point of view, but he really handles from his gut, but I don't think his gut feeling when it comes to football is all that good. He makes a lot of mistakes and he doesn't own up to them. So that's very painful from an owner's point of view.
And from a fan's point of view as well, it's painful watching all of this happen. And, up until, I suppose, protest does take place, you feel rather powerless watching it. Scott, just from what you knew, that seemed to come fairly out of the blue. I mean, I know John Textor has a terrible track record, but it doesn't really have a track record of trying to force through name and brand changes. It just seems it was quite random.
I think John Textor is a very abrasive figure. I think if you look at any of the clubs that he has an involvement with, he's never had a good relationship with any of those clubs or any of those clubs' fan bases. This is somebody who doesn't appreciate or understand the importance of having a good ongoing relationship with a fan base and with a wider community as well. The misunderstanding communities is quite important here, because when this news broke at the start of last month, I was doing a little bit of digging and research, as I always do when stories start to blow up. And there's a very interesting page on Eagle Football Group's website, which may or may not still be there. They may have taken it down by now, probably because it's that embarrassing. I haven't checked, but not before I could get some screenshots, because it made me laugh at the time. And it's classic PR speak on a multi-club ownership website. So it says, the page is entitled Eagle Football Beliefs. So, it's a manifesto, it's a statement, and they say, we are lovers of football, we are committed to the communities that we serve. We believe football clubs and communities are inextricably linked, and the ownership of clubs should ultimately be in the hands of the public. Now, this is all great. Most football fans would not disagree with any of that. But when you look at the way John Textor operates across the whole of the Eagle Group, none of that is put into practice. I was saying back at the beginning that if a club is going to do a rebrand, and clubs do it sometimes, and often it's just around one element, like a club crest or something like that. This is an entire rebrand. This is, in fact, the only thing that's staying the same under the rebrand essentially are the club colours.
No, not really. He added gold to it. Because Eagle football, the color is gold, so now we were gold as well, which is a bit weird for a football club.
Yeah, so from John Textor's point of view, when you look at this rebrand, he's not changing that much. He would argue, look, all of this is just within the club's history. It's a minor tweaking. We're just emphasising Brussels rather than Molenbeek, because strategically that's kind of more important. I think he completely misunderstands the fan base's connection with that local community, and the fact that the absolute essence of the fan base of RWDM is Molenbeek based. It is based in that community. So while there may be fans who live in other parts of Brussels and possibly even other parts of Belgium, the core of that fan base are Molenbeek residents. People who live in the community, know the community, have ties to that community, and therefore have ties to that club, which is where the emotional connection comes in. And on an intellectual level, John Textor doesn't understand this. And I think it's partly because when you own a multi-club ownership network, and you see this with other people who have their own multi-club ownership networks, it's not possible for you operationally to have oversight of a number of clubs in an effective way at all. If you're going to do that, you really should have somebody on the ground inside the clubs, CEOs and sporting directors and people who understand the fan base and the club and the community that are around that. John Textor thinks that actually essentially they're all the same and that I can control things from my own bedroom or wherever he's pressing his buttons. It's a complete disconnect with what the community and the culture around the club's about. And I think if you defer to somebody who knows more about these things, then over a period of time you're going to learn more about the club. And I actually think if they'd gone about this the right way and had maybe started some serious consultation about this within the Molenbeek community and within the club's fan base, maybe a year before this was announced out of nowhere, then maybe they would have been able to persuade and take some people with them. But it's been done in a way that you've actually got no chance, because he wasn't trusted or respected before, and now he's dropped what for the local community is in many ways the ultimate insult on them. You can't, how do you repair that short of saying, I'm going to do what I'm going to do because I own the club, in which case we're faced with a really interesting scenario, and I'd be interested to hear what Filip think of this. If John Textor sticks to his guns and refuses to change the name back, and he's left the door open for that now by asking for permission for that, is it the case you think that there'll be a separation between the clubs now and we'll see something similar to maybe what happened with Beveren all those years ago, where there was a split in the fan base there and effectively different clubs formed? Or do you think he is likely to back down?
It's incredibly difficult to answer because John Textor's fate as well is very uncertain at the moment with everything that's happening at Eagle Football and Lyon. I've even heard today that even people who work at the club have no idea what's going on. You said at the beginning that someone of the club has asked the federation if it's possible to change back the name. But then now today, John Textor sent a press release saying there's a new president for Lyon. He steps down there, but he's going to focus on Botafogo and on daring Brussels. So that feels a bit like an insult to us. But I think there was a lot of struggle inside of Eagle Football going on between John Textor and the people who he owes money to. So we have no idea what's going to happen. What I'm sure of is that John Textor will not be the one that backs down. He's not going to be the one that says, okay, guys, you're right, I made a mistake, let's change it back. He's not going to do that. I think the only way if this change gets unmade is if he leaves the club, or if the club is being sold, or something else happens, because he's not going to do it out of himself. If it stays like this, if it's there in Brussels, I think, especially because of the way it's being handled and the uncertainty and the chaos that surrounds the club right now, pre-season begins today for the club, and we don't even have a coach because no one has had the time to deal with this, because John Textor has other things on his mind. So we have some players, we have no incoming transfers, we have no coach. So the chances of this name change going to work and have an impact on the field is virtually none. Because I would say if now he built a great team with a great coach and they're going to play top of the league, then probably some people would come back even because of the name, because you got a winning team, and that always attracts people, perhaps different people, but it will attract people. But how it's going to work right now, I don't see this being a success. I suspect a very difficult season with no fans. And the thing with RWDM, we've done it before, we can do it again, start over. Even now, people are already thinking, can we do something else to restart? And even if Daring Brussels continues to exist, we'll make a new RWDM separate from that. That's also a question that we've been asking the city council that owns the stadium. We've been asking them, okay, first and foremost, kick John Textor out of the stadium with Daring Brussels, because he insulted the community of Molenbeek as well with changing the name. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but if he can stay in the stadium, give us the space to do something separate as well. But it's so soon to really say something about that, because we have no idea what's going to happen or what's going on right now. But I'm sure that I'm quite convinced that the way it's going at the moment, that John Textor's palace is coming down sooner rather than later. It's happening in Lyon, and he doesn't have the know-how to really build a successful club, especially with all the chaos that's going on now. He hasn't got the people, and he hasn't got the knowledge of football to make this work. work. If it stays there in Brussels, I think it's already with an expiration date. It's not going to work. We'll make sure that we as a fan base, we will still be there, and we'll be trying to do something new here for about the fourth or fifth time in the last 30 years. It's been unfortunately something that we're used to stand up and to try to save our club in some capacity.
Daring Brussels has an expiration date. That's quite a damning statement, but I think it's justified considering all that's happened. John Textor comes across as a man, like you said, Filip, it's very obvious that he takes a lot of this for granted. He doesn't really understand how football identities work, particularly with what Scott said when you talk about place. Especially Molenbeek, these people are tied to the club because it's rooted within the community. That's what gives it its name. That's why it doesn't have the Brussels name. Crystal Palace, if you tried changing it to Croydon, well, it might work. If you tried to change it to Greater London, well, it definitely wouldn't work. You need to consult people on these things. And I mean, personally, Filip, again, I don't know Molenbeek. I don't know the supporters. I don't know the club. But as Scott said there, if they had a consultation with the fans, they may have tried to persuade them. I'm not sure if they would have been able to. But you're right, Scott, in that it would have given him a little bit more power in the sense of all respect for him just wouldn't be completely lost. Because, I mean, when you talk about that kind of exchange between owner and fans and you bring heritage and identity into it, you need to be very, very careful in how you move. And like you said at the beginning, this is just how you don't do that, because he's lost any form of support or bargaining power that he might have been able to gain from the supporters doing that.
Yeah, I think he's in an impossible situation, and I think he's proved that he's an almost impossible person to deal with. I mean, hearing from Filip there, the people working at the club on a day-to-day basis essentially have no idea what's happening at the moment. Tells you that there's this kind of operational chaos and incompetence. I was talking about how the right way to do this, and other multi-club networks do this because they're not all bad. They have teams inside the club across the operational side of things who know what they're doing and are there because usually they understand the clubs and the communities and the history of the club, and they know what it is that they're working with. I think John Textor sees if you haven't been following his story in any of these clubs, then they're very much toys to kind of play with, and a lot of the decision making is very arbitrary. I mean, for him, each decision is a purely business one, and that's what's behind the entire motivation for this rebrand as well. It's to make the club more appealing on a number of levels to lots of people. But the question is, well, why is that? I mean, there is the argument that says that all of this is just kind of a form of window dressing for a potential sale of the club as well. But I don't think John Textor's that interested in selling RWDM or Daring or whatever he would like to call them at all at the moment, because from a multi-club ownership perspective, owning a Belgian club actually is very useful to you because it allows you to bring players from South America and Asia before they might go to a larger club and a network somewhere else in Europe. So that's been the attraction for a lot of multi-club owners acquiring Belgian clubs. From a strategic perspective, having a Belgian club in your portfolio is very useful to you. So although he has no personal connection to the club, and in fact, he's very rarely around the Edmund Macton Stadium. Do you know what I mean? You maybe see him at the start of the season at a couple of games, maybe towards the end of the season. Most club owners you will see at every game, home and away. But then most club owners only own one club, which is why you have a team. You have a team of individuals inside the club who will be across every game. So he misunderstands that probably the most important thing about football, and that's the community aspect of it. Football clubs are communities. Those communities are cultures, and the clubs are an expression of that. And he doesn't understand that number one starting point. And if you don't understand that, you obviously don't understand football by extension. And where do you go from there? You almost kind of can't work with that because you have an owner who is just incompetent with basic decisions. I think from the moment you go into a club, if you're buying a club as a new owner, the very, very first thing you have to do is develop a connection with the fan base, the wider fan base. Make sure that's genuine, first of all, not just PR, and work at that on an ongoing basis. And that's something that he never did. When John Textor came into RWDM, it was on bad terms with people. He fell out with people almost instantly, offended people. It did not go well. It was a textbook example on how not to behave and to do this. And actually, it's just got worse from there because he's the sort of individual who just thinks he can do what he wants. He doesn't learn the lessons of the situations that he gets himself into. I mean, even in the last few days, we look at Lyon being relegated. A couple of days after that, he came out and said, look, I don't think I've handled my own interactions with French football and French football culture probably very well. I'm going to step back from day-to-day operations and not have too much involvement day-to-day anymore, but I will have day-to-day involvement with the other clubs in the network. The lesson there is the same as the lesson here, and that is, no, step away from all of these clubs and make sure you have individuals working across the operations inside who do know what they're doing. You know, you're merely a kind of consultative figure. That's the way that it should work effectively. But he doesn't talk to people and he doesn't consult with them, and he absolutely offends the people that he should hold closest to him. I mean, Filip mentioned somebody earlier on who's an important part of this story, actually, because he's exactly the sort of person that John Textor should have held very close, and that's Thierry Daly. He used to be chairman and owner of the club, and John Textor fell out with Thierry Daly very early and there was no going back. And that was, in many ways, the beginning of the downward trajectory as far as the club and as far as John Textor's relationship with RWDM is concerned. And we're all just sitting waiting at the moment, because still, if you look at the club's social media, as Filip says, there's been no communication on any issue. The name, we don't know yet. It may be being changed back. Radio silence. We don't know about the coach. John Textor is reportedly set to favour Yaya Toure. There's an agreement in place which hasn't been signed because nobody knows what's happening at all. So presumably the poor staff sitting there behind their desks doing the day job inside the club are waiting for an email to find out what's happening. I mean, we're recording this on the date today is the 30th of June. As of tomorrow, the 1st of July, that's the day where the daring name legally becomes set in stone. So in theory, from midnight tonight, that can't be changed unless the FA give their permission. And according to the rules, the time lapse has already passed. So they would have to give special dispensation for it to be changed back, which I think they would, because I think they understand the reality of this situation. But even that's not as simple as, you know, can we change the name back, please? So it's a watch and wait. But I think, you know, it must be hugely frustrating for Filip and the fan base, because every day and every hour that ticks by is just lost time here in preparation for the new season. There's no reason why RWDM can't go and have a very decent season in the Challenger Pro League if things really, really get moving. But, you know, there are some simple but really important decisions that need made today so that the day-to-day footballing operations can really begin, because lots of people have left, but nobody's coming in.
The problem in Eagle football right now is that no one has any idea who can make those calls. So we are asking for them to change back the name, and getting the impression that no one knows who can make that call. So it's a total chaos. And like you said, yeah, you named Thierry Daly. We had the owner who was involved, who was locally involved, who lived and breathed RWDM all through his veins. But he had to sell because having a club in Belgium, professional football, is just way too expensive. And it's not only RWDM. I think lots of clubs are in financial difficulties or already bankrupt, like Ostende, like Dance, because they're easy victims for foreign owners who have no idea what these clubs mean and don't necessarily have the best interest of the club by heart. So it's a very depressive state of view for Belgian football in general, I think, because RWDM is not the first and won't be the last to be in this kind of situation. Because if we don't disappear now, it will be quite soon, I think, with everything that happens in Eagle. So it's really really frustrating.
I guess the thing is, though, and as you said, you know, you guys have previous with setting up again and starting from scratch. And from what you've said, it sounds like fans are already considering that and are happy to do it because it means that at least you would have some form of control in it. But there's so many different paths this could go down, Scott. You mentioned a split earlier. I thought that was a really good point. It's not something that I'd thought of, but it's something that could be a very real possibility. And one thing that I thought about, sometimes on this show we talk about this concept of authenticity and what makes a football club and a football club's identity authentic. And what I wondered is if John Textor has looked at matricule number 2, and because it's, well, the second ever matricule number, he's viewed it as some kind of way to authenticate the club in his vision. I just wanted to know what you guys thought about that.
Well, First of all, nobody buys that because no one thinks that John Textor really cares about that number. I think I'm almost certain of it that John Textor had a different name in mind. A couple of years ago, he once spoke that he would like to name the club Brussels Eagles, to really put it in line with Eagle football. And I think that the people on the ground, the people that work at the club, try to convince him to some sort of compromise. And the daring name is something that will not have come from John Textor. It will come from them. The number 2, he doesn't care about a number, I think, and that's something they try to put into, as I said, to soothe the fans a bit, to make us happy with something small. And secondly, when you really talk about that number, RWDM has had all the previous reiterations of this club. We've had so many different numbers, matricules over the course of the years, that it's impossible to say that for us has a meaning when it comes to our identity. We always said that our club isn't being made by a number. It's because of the people in the stadium. It's because of the stadium. It's because of the crest, the symbol. That's what makes RWDM, not a stupid number. And if you've been saying for so many years that the number doesn't matter, why would you then suddenly be happy when they bring you number 2 that you never even asked for? It's really a personal kind of view, but for me, a matricule means zero concerning the identity of a club or the soul of a club. We're the only country in the world that has some kind of number, and in general, the lower the number of your club, the more importance you attach to it. That's why Antwerp is always bragging, because they're the oldest one, they're number 1. But right now we're number 5,479. It doesn't mean anything for me. It's just a number. It's completely artificial for me. And because we've had so many over the years, it means that we've had our issues, and we had a lot of, we disappeared and we came back again, and it's always with a different number. But for me, it doesn't mean that we're a different club. It just means that we had bad luck with bad owners, and we always had to try to restart something from scratch, which wasn't something that we as fans wanted to do, but we were obliged to do it because we're the ones that get to clean up the mess when the bad owners leave. And there is a big problem with the matricles, is that sometimes you have to take over the matricles of other clubs in order to survive or to recreate something. And in Molenbeek that happened as well a couple of times. Now the number we use was from another club originally that was called Wetteren. So people who don't like RWDM call us Wetteren right now. And we got a lot of flack for that, and I understand that, because then you're kind of parasiting, being a parasite to a smaller club and changing their course of history, and that's not a good thing. But that's because you need a number to recreate something. And I think if you should reimagine Belgian football, you should just get rid of those numbers. And if a club goes bankrupt, there is still a group of people that cares, and you have a decent project and a decent stadium that you can propose, that you can start in some of the lower leagues without having to climb all the leagues to get back up. So yeah, in general, for me, a number is just a number, and it doesn't say anything about who we as a club or fan base are. We're just always the victims of people that fuck up upstairs, and it's the people downstairs that try to make something new, and you need a number for that. And it's not us who invented that, but we're just trying to create something for some people that still care. And we're not tens of thousands of supporters, but we are a couple of thousand people who really committed to that club. And if those people are still there and they still care, why wouldn't you try to recreate something and create a story and a club to make those people happy?
Yeah, I mean, Scott and I have spoken about that before, the idea that, by taking a smaller or an amateur club's matricule number, you're erasing their identity for the supporters, those small in number who follow them. And we have rhymed off quite a lot on the issues in Belgian football and how this has become part of the football culture, but it's not necessarily a good thing. But it's interesting comparing, the conversations that we've had around Belgian football. One of the very first that was on the show was with KSK Beveren, and they spoke about how important their matricule number is to them. But obviously now, Filip, you're saying, which I find really fascinating, is that as long as you have the supporters, as long as you have the community, and as long as you have Molenbeek, the number doesn't matter, which I actually prefer.
I know the story of Beveren and how they started at the bottom, and I think it's a fantastic story, but it's such a difficult story because they're not playing in the old stadium of Beveren. There is the other Beveren plays there, and if I were a supporter of Beveren, I think I would stick to the stadium, because for me the soul of a club is the stadium. It's the place where I've been going since I was a child. And I think it would be difficult for me to then go to a pitch where there are 50 people perhaps next to a cow field. And it's very charming, and it's perhaps more real than taking over other clubs, and I completely understand that. But
It's very difficult to make something like that work, because you really need the people to be committed to really go watch at the lowest of levels. I'm not saying that clubs that go bankrupt, that they should just keep on going business as usual, like nothing has happened. No, they should be start again from a lower league. But I think there is some kind of compromise possible between really having to start the lowest league, because the way up is so difficult, and you cannot say that you will use a big stadium in the lowest league of Belgian football, because the city won't even allow you to it. And for me, it's always the stadium that's a bit crucial to the identity of a club.
But our history between Beveren and Molenbeek and a lot of other clubs in Belgium are quite similar. You have a lot of clubs in Belgium that are being called tradition clubs because they have a huge tradition, but they are already new versions of the old team. Waregem is now Zulte Waregem. La Louvière, that's now being promoted to the first division, is also already a different team. You have Beveren, you have Lierse. The number of teams that are still in their original capacity, it keeps getting smaller and smaller, especially in the second division of Belgium. Already every team is a new version of a team that previously existed. So that means for me that there's something wrong, not with these clubs, but with Belgian football in general. So many clubs keep disappearing, and it's very difficult to fight back and to climb back up. But for me, as long as there are people that care, it's worth your while to do something about it and to try to create something for these people.
100%. As you said a moment ago, Scott, this has all moved pretty quickly, and today is technically the legal deadline for the name to stick or to be changed. Obviously, we won't know until the end of today, presumably, but what do you think is next?
Well, I do agree with Filip. John Textor's not somebody who tends to back down. He will respond to whatever circumstance follows through and make a decision. I think he would be very well advised to listen to the Football Heritage podcast and the Belgian Football podcast, because the answers and the advice to everything that he needs, actually, he genuinely needs, are in these two podcasts.
So true.
There's a free resource as well. Even in business terms, it's all just there for him to learn why all of this is kind of so important, and would make you better at what you do. But I think, like Filip says, I think anything is up for grabs with John Textor, and it's very difficult to deal with somebody like that who is such a loose cannon. This is much like the Vincent Tan school of football ownership, with his multi-club network. Of course, Belgian connection again here. He still owns Kortrijk and Cardiff City. English football fans and Welsh football fans may well remember that way back at the beginning when he was at Cardiff, he decided that he wanted to rebrand and change them from playing in blue to playing in red because he thought you could sell more red shirts, which is, it's just pure madness. And it's extremely similar to what Filip was saying about John Textor's preference about calling the club Brussels Eagles. Everything is up for grabs because of, that means we can sell more shirts and all of these things, which are important in a business sense in terms of growing a club. But you can never do that at the expense of a history and a culture and a community, because that's what clubs are. That's what you're selling. And I think if you break that link and you don't understand that link, then you've got no chance. And this is somebody who, he's very much an island. And at the moment he's drowning.
How would you advise us as a fan base to deal with this? How do you have any idea how in Cardiff they managed to turn it back? I think Hull City was also a similar kind of story where they managed to turn it back, but we're kind of desperate because we don't really know what we still can do about it, because you feel that no one is listening.
It's a really good point. I think fan power and fan protest goes a long way to resolving these things, and whether that is by protesting and forcing action by the ownership group, or whether that is completely forming a new club on its own, I think fan power goes a long way, and by taking that power off of the person who has ran your club into the ground, you make a huge statement by doing so, because at the end of the day, if you as a collective fan group choose to form a new club, then all the fans are going to be there. Who is going to continue going to see Daring Brussels? And they're the ones that have to start from the beginning. I would probably say that organising as efficiently, as effectively and as quickly as possible as a fan group is the best way to go about things. The club that I support, Celtic, also had these issues, and it was through fan organisation that was able to take place. There's instances of this happening around the world. Chester, who reformed because of their fans, Aldershot, who reformed because of their fans, Hereford, who reformed because of their fans. We could point to so many examples. And I think the fan organisation side of things goes a long way into actually taking that power back and being able to put it into a really effective and sustainable use for your football club.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons in here around how to handle this. I've been tremendously impressed by the Molenbeek fan base over the last 6 weeks or so. I mean, to amass over 3,000 signatures from around the world, to have the support of the local municipal council, which isn't insignificant at all here, because as Filip was indicating earlier, for those who don't know, legally, they actually own the stadium and the facilities. So it is within their power to completely remove Daring as the tenants of the stadium and the facilities. They're in a difficult position slightly, because from John Textor's point of view, I'm sure he's thinking, well, in the worst case scenario, I could essentially just offer to buy the stadium, which was always something he'd thought about doing, but didn't feel like he was going to do because he didn't need to at a certain point. He may be in a situation now where if he continues down the path he's on, he doesn't have much choice other than to try and do that. I don't think it would look very good from the municipal council's point of view to sell the facilities to John Textor, because they're in a position where they represent the local community, and I think a lot of people that wouldn't go down very well with the local community, I suspect. So financially it could be good from the council's perspective, but from a political point of view, I think it could be disastrous for them. Rory's right. Fan power is tremendously important in this, and I think the fans have to decide what their preferred course of action here is. And I think it sounds to me, and this is where having Filip here has been tremendously valuable to the conversation, it sounds like there is a consensus already that they would, if necessary, rather there be a split so that you have a pure club that does have a following and does have a community, and one that goes its own way, that may not have a following at all, and what road that may go down there. I mean, the Beveren example is quite interesting because there was obviously a split there. One club has kind of continued, and again, it comes back to Filip's point about the stadium. Vassland Beveren, now known as SK Beveren, obviously, they have survived and grown and remain the main club, I suppose, in terms of pool and identity within the community, but because they've held on to that facility and that infrastructure. The original club went its own way and has actually done very well in its own right, I suppose, but it's not going to return to the size of club that the SK Beveren are. And obviously there have been moves in recent years for the clubs to kind of come together again, and they have moved towards a reconciliation of sorts, but a reconciliation in this case, I suspect long term can't happen really as long as John Textor's there, because even if the name does change back, I think the fans are going to be waiting for what's the next clanger here? What's it going to be? I don't know. I mean, I suspect most Molenbeek fans are just desperate for John Textor to sell the club to somebody with a moral centre who knows what they're doing in an operational sense.
Yeah, I mean, one last thing that I'd probably say, Filip, is just to, protect and also remember the types of things that are important to RWDM, so the stadium, the community, the badge, the colours, those emblems that really tie the supporters to the identity and therefore to the community, means that moving forward, the club is still going to have a future.
Yeah, a big problem with all that is that the name and the crest, the logo, is property of Eagle Football right now and John Textor. So we have to ask him. So if that's also one of the questions we've asked the club. Yeah, if you're going to continue with this, okay, by all means do so, but please give us back the rights to the name and the logo so that we can create something else. I don't think it's in their best interest to do that, because then they probably have another club on their hands and no fans anymore. So it means that you're really powerless to really do that, and then you have to you create a new logo and change the name a little bit. It's too soon to say that, but that's a big problem that we're being faced with, that we don't even own our own crest. Even a crest, a logo that he just wants to throw away, but he still has the rights to that, and he won't. I don't think he will give that back to people who want to do something new. So that's very painful for us.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we said just before we started recording that this would be an opportunity for you to get quite a lot off of your chest. Is there anything else you can think of that you want to get off?
Yeah, it's really frustrating, everything that happens here, because as I said, my history with this club has been a history of problems and misery and going bankrupt and starting over again and changing our names. It's almost never calm in Molenbeek. And I told about 10 years ago when we started the club from scratch. For me, that was really the proof that we can do something on our own without anyone's help. We really did that almost completely by ourselves. We start the club, we build it from scratch to make something new, and now all that's shown in the trash by someone who knows better. I was even busy making a documentary about that whole year, 2015, where we created the club, because it was really a powerful story of people coming together and trying to do something and prevailing against all the odds. And right now, yeah, my whole film is being a little bit in peril, because it all revolves around the name and the stadium and that club. And if you don't have a name and the logo anymore, it feels a bit tragic, not a happy end that we initially had. So I think I don't think there are a lot of clubs in Belgium that have the same history of problems and changes other than us. It's always, as I've said, other people that made the mistakes, and the fans that have to pay the price. And yeah, I think I would hope that for once we can have something stable in Molenbeek and have just our club. It doesn't have to be at the highest level, but just a little bit more sincere than the owner that we have right now.
Yeah, then just to have your club as well. Yeah, I think that sums everything up quite nicely. Obviously, we're recording this on the 30th of June, and it's going to be out on the 7th of July, which is a week away. Quite a lot can happen in that space of time. So, we'll keep people up to date with what happens pre and post this recording going out. Scott, is there anything else that you would like to add just before we finish up? Obviously, this is a kind of quickly developing situation at this stage still.
Just one thing, I suppose, worth bearing in mind. I would say to the Molenbeek fans, stick together, because ultimately all football clubs are the fan bases. The executive teams inside clubs will come and go and will change. Coaching staffs will change. The one thing that doesn't change are the fans of any club. They are the club. They are the culture. They are the one constant. So I would say to the Molenbeek fans, stick together regardless, and something positive will come out of this. We don't know what that is yet, but that's the lesson of history, actually, if that happens. And we've seen it elsewhere in Belgium as well, to really localise this. Those fan bases that have stuck together post-bankruptcy, post-apocalypse, have, in a lot of cases, started again, and something positive has come from that. So sticking together, I think, is the real lesson here.
I think that's a really good point. Again, not been the most pleasant of chats, but Scott, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast again. Filip, thank you very much for coming on for the first time. Be happy to have you on again anytime. Perhaps if a new club is formed, perhaps if a club is saved, we'll see what happens within the next week. Of course, you can check out Scott's work at the Belgian Football Podcast. You can check out Filip's work, his journalism work, and his work within RWDM. We will put links to that in our show notes. And of course, thank you to all of our listeners who tuned in for this episode. If there is anything that you want to chat with us about, or anything that, any questions that you have about this episode, you can DM us on X, that's @_footyheritage, or you can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk as well. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please also consider leaving a review or a comment. It does a lot to help us with the algorithm and get pushed in front of new listeners. But for now, Scott, say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Filip, say goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you for your kind words and your support.
Anytime, mate. Thank you very much for coming on. It's goodbye from me as well. We'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.